So let's go ahead and do episode number 2 of the Ghost Panther podcast. I hope the audio is okay. I'm not blasting you guys. Let's do the ghost story first, and then the near-death experience, and then the cryptid encounter. Okay, so the ghost story, it's from Valentine's Campfire Special, episode 643 of Jim Harold's podcast, which I love. I love his ghost stories, and I just want to talk about one that he shares. So there's this English guy. He's an employee on a yacht. So he's helping out with this yacht. He's part of the crew. He was working in South France. They get out into the Mediterranean Sea, and there's a huge storm they get caught in. And he smacks up against the railing on the ship, and he's sent down to his bunk with a broken rib, and he's like supposed to recover. And while he's down there kind of slumbering, kind of in a daze, a little bit of physical shock, trying to recover as they're dealing with the storm up on deck, he slips into this experience. Okay. He falls down into darkness, and he just remembers wanting to be with his wife. And he remembers standing at the foot of the bed of his wife while he was away. Now, he was away for 3 weeks. And he stood there for a long time. And the situation here was that he felt like the dream was absolutely different than any other dream that he had ever had. He felt absolutely like he was there while he was experiencing this like traumatic injury to his rib cage. And he said that he stayed there for hours. It felt like he was there for a very, very long time. Okay, the 3 weeks. So he ends up basically just coming to, and then eventually he goes back up on deck, and he tries to help, and then he eventually finds out he has broken ribs and stuff. But the 3 weeks, he stays out, and he continues to work for the whole 3 weeks. He comes back, and the first thing his wife tells him is, oh my gosh, this crazy thing happened. Now, before he gets back to his wife, he's so impressed by this bizarre dream that he had about standing in his wife's bedroom at the foot of her bed and just wanting to be with her so bad, yearning to be with her, and then watching over her and letting her sleep. And from his perspective, he was like, felt so much peace and fulfillment being there. Okay. She says, I have to tell you about this thing. I felt that there was someone in the room on this specific night. And I looked, and it was a shadow person, and I was paralyzed. I was horrified. And this shadow person just stayed there staring at me. And she said, eventually I saw that it was your outline. She says it was an unmistakable outline, and then I guess she comprehended that it was like him watching over her. But she said she couldn't move, she was terrified, and she just eventually just waited to go back to sleep. So that's her perspective of the experience. And so I just think that it's interesting that he, on his end, was feeling so much like love and peace and, unity and whatever with his wife, and she was feeling terror. And it's an interesting experience. And I love that type of thing where shadow people is like the most ubiquitous ghost story. Shadow people are everywhere in the world of ghost stories. It's a very, very common thing. Last week, I just listened to a ghost story where a guy saw his grandfather that recently passed as a shadow person, and he felt a lot of love from him. So it's just interesting. So I like that. He said, the guy goes, it was just an awesome revelation because it had been documented in his journal. And then his wife told him, he said, I just wouldn't have believed it if I myself hadn't written it down with the date and the time and all the feelings about standing by her bed exactly for hours and all these things. And then she, that same exact night, had this experience. So to him, it was a very veridical experience. And that's just a cool ghost story. I really like ghost stories like that make you think, or is it a ghost story? Is it just some sort of weird, like, astral projection? Or are astral projectors like... Astral projection is something that is endlessly fascinating to me. I've never done it. I've tried to do like astral projection meditations, and I really haven't had a lot of luck, any luck at all with that. But I've taken psychedelic PTSD therapy. And ever since then, I could comprehend how astral projection could happen. I've also done ayahuasca, and that was profound. I can do in the future. I'll probably do episodes on what happened to me during my ayahuasca experience. But I can comprehend how astral projection could happen after having experienced psychedelics. Now, I didn't experience psychedelics until my mid 30s because I grew up Mormon and I was very, very dedicated. And the dogmas of Mormonism are explicitly against, or were anyway, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, explicitly against psychedelics. Okay, let's talk about a near-death experience that happened with my brother. And this is absolutely, I didn't even know about this. He recently exposed this to me. He had been keeping this a secret from the family. This is my older brother, and this happened when he was 17 years old. And this is kind of this is a very special experience. And I'm not going to include all the details. There's a lot more that he has, and he's going to record it hopefully and give it to NDERF, which is Near Death Experience Research Foundation, and it's a global organization who they compile all the near-death experience stuff. Anyway, this is fresh. This is nowhere else on the internet. This is my brother's near-death experience. It's absolutely amazing. He's 17 years old. He goes to Bridalveil Falls with his cousin Kimmy, and they are accompanied by our Uncle Carrie at the time. He's now divorced from my aunt, so Carrie's really not in our family anymore, but at the time, my aunt was married to a man named Carrie. He was a cool guy, and he took his teenage, nephew and niece to go hiking, to go climbing around Bridalveil Falls in Utah on the rocks. Well, it turns out that my brother and Kim, and she's like 20 or 21 or something. They're in shorts and t-shirts, okay? And they start climbing up above the snow line, and they get into the woods up there, and then it gets dark. Sometimes when you're outside, you're having fun, you're just kind of goofing off. Sometimes you don't even notice that twilight is happening, and boom, it just gets dark on them. And then they realize, oh, this is a very serious situation. They had gotten separated from the adult, which was Carrie, and so now it's just Justin, my brother, and Kim, cousin Kim. Okay. And they're like, okay, what are we going to do? Should we climb down in the dark? We can't do that. There's a lot of wind. There's a lot of ice. It got cold really fast. The temperature just plummeted. It was down at 7 degrees Fahrenheit, or with a wind chill of -7. So it was just a wild night. I can't remember what time of year this was, but they said the snow, they were hiking through like shin deep or knee deep snow, and it was cutting their shins and their ankles because there was like frost on the top of the snow. So they luckily found a little shack, little pieces of carpet that they tried to use as snowshoes. And it started, and they neither one of them, I've talked to both of them about this, neither one of them had the impression that it was a very serious or life-threatening situation. I mean, it was scary because they're like, crap, we are literally going to have to stay out here. They were stressed. They were kind of freaking out. But both of them did not, I feel like they were like, okay, we're not going to die. We can do this. They had this attitude that they could just make it through this, and maybe it's because they were kids. I don't think they fully comprehended how serious this situation was, being in shorts and t-shirts in -7. They ended up crawling to get out of the wind. They crawled under a pine tree that was like on top of a rock, and so the boughs of the pine tree kind of came down and formed a little place where they could be kind of out of the wind. And then they tried to dig into the dirt, which is not, I would not recommend doing that. I'd recommend gathering pine boughs and brush and leaves and whatever and piling it up. But anyway, I'm not them. So they're just kids. They think that they can dig down into the earth, which is already kind of frozen, and snuggle up against this cold boulder and stay out of the wind, and maybe they can stay, warm enough. The problem is, though, if you're laying on bare ground, if you're laying on earth, they were in dirt, they were in earth, that just sucks the heat right out of your body. So they thought, By the way, by the time they started trying to dig, they couldn't like really move their fingers anymore. Okay, so they're trying to dig into this stuff. And then they decided, well, let's try to spoon each other and just try and keep as warm as possible. And my brother says that they kept trying to spoon each other back and forth, but gradually, like he was losing control of his fingers, his wrists, and then his forearms. And then they still didn't think that they were going to die. By the way, the search and rescue helicopter had already come. They had screamed and wailed and everything, and they had climbed trees. They had done everything, but they were kind of out of view, and they couldn't really get to a place where they could be in view of this thing. And then it stopped coming. And so my brother was like, hey man, they stopped coming. Let's literally just walk out of here. Let's hike out of here. And she's like, no, first of all, it's too cold. And secondly, we can't hike down because of ice. We're just going to fall down the cliffs. We can't do it. Okay. So they decide to wait the night out. Okay. So then, they're laying there, and pretty soon they can't even spoon anymore. And so they decide to just put their spines against each other, stick their backs together. And my brother, again, not understanding how serious this situation was, he says that he remembers his whole body freezing and his whole head, not his face or his skin, his whole head going numb. He says he no longer could control his eyelids or any of the parts of his face, and he could no longer even move his eyes. He says, my eyes froze where I like couldn't use them anymore, and they were open. And he goes, there was starlight, and there was like light from the city reflecting off the clouds. There's like a faint glow coming from the sky. And then he says he started backing away from that until he could see his eyes like further in front of him. He was receding like into his body. He was, what's that word? He was coming back down inside of and down into his body until his eyes, his eye holes where the light was coming in, it was far above him. He felt like he had sunk down until he was in a completely loving black space, the place of blackness. So those of you who are familiar with near-death experiences are familiar with the place of darkness. Like it's like a peaceful, loving, black, endlessly expansive space that you go into that just seems to go for eternity in all directions. It's just black and it's vast, but it's full of love, consciousness, awareness, stillness, and peace. It's a very comforting place to be. So the light above him from his eyes is now completely gone. It disappeared. He's now standing in Utah Valley, or what seems to be kind of the version of Utah Valley in the spirit world. It's not winter, it's spring, it's robust and beautiful. Things are blooming. He says, I was like 10 years old. He was in a spirit form of a 10-year-old. So it's interesting that he says he had the appearance of his 10-year-old self. He said most of the people that were there were young. They were youthful. They were like between like 8 or maybe young teens. They were all like young, boyish or girlish people. And he knew intuitively that all of them were going through a death experience. So there were a couple hundred, and he could see 30 miles up the Wasatch Front and down the Wasatch Front. He was in the Wasatch Mountain Range in Utah, but he said he was standing there and it was blooming and it was beautiful, and it was like the spirit world version of the earth. So that's interesting. By the way, he's LDS, so you're going to see a lot of LDS themes. By the way, whatever religion you are, generally those are the types of experiences that come through in a near-death experience. That to me, that makes sense because that's the language that you speak. That's the imagery that you know. So that just makes sense to me that a spiritual experience would speak your spiritual language. So it doesn't bother me that people have near-death experiences that kind of conform to their religious views. Anyway, so he's now standing in Utah Valley. He's right by the foothills leading up to Mount Timpanogos. He can see that other people are there and it's daytime. I started running. It was grassy. There were grassy fields in the close foothills below the mountains. There was flowers. People were bounding and leaping and playing and skipping rocks and jumping over logs and playing tag. and it was very, very joyous. It was like a graduation. It was like, you finished boot camp or something. That I remember Justin coming out of boot camp feeling like he could just take on the whole world. It was like a huge experience for him. Just the feeling of like, we've made it, we've done it, this is so awesome, oh my gosh, it was like a party. And they started to run faster and faster and leap higher and higher and farther off the hilltops and the ridges. And they were all slowly, as they played and like celebrated, they were kind of ascending the mountain. They all kind of felt like this pull to the top of these mountains. And the mountains were larger in the spirit world. This is just interesting. Okay. Everyone recently had died. He was thrilled. He felt this whole thing was very physical. He felt a lot of physical freedom. And that is another cool part of near-death experiences, is that so many people talk about having a body and having a physical sensation and it being a very physical experience. And it makes me wonder if what we're experiencing right now in this 3D reality is not the only type of physicality. What if there's all sorts of different dimensions where things are also physical? It's interesting to me. He felt physically free. He felt stronger. He felt like his legs were faster and more firm and more robust. His muscles, he liked to like clench his muscles. It was just really cool. He felt strong, light, not heavy, he says, jumping over rivers, then one ridge to another, going up and up. I came to a waterfall. Now, this is where the experience starts to get really spiritual for him. I came to a waterfall, and I climbed up the waterfall. On the cliff by the top of the waterfall, kind of gazing out over the scene, I saw someone sitting with their back to me. I decided to I felt like I needed to go to them, so I came around fully around them, and I stood facing them. I stood in front of them, facing them. He says, I could see it was Jesus. Now, Jesus, Krishna, Mother Mary, Joseph Smith, all of the different types of deities in Hinduism, all of these religious elements, as well as like oxen carrying you to the other side of the river, all of this cultural imagery comes up, like I say, in near-death experiences. And I'll talk about, like, over the course of this podcast, I'll talk about why that happens. By the way, my brother says he never had the impression that this needs to be taken literally, but he had the impression that this was very powerful, meaningful imagery meant to like teach him and like strengthen him. So I think that's a mature view that he has. He said he saw that it was Jesus. He said something really important that he goes, I'm not allowed to remember it now, but I can't remember it anymore. But it gave me he gave me a perfect clear stone, and the stone was the most perfect material in the entire universe. And it was like a crystalline substance, and he could see that it was glowing and it was perfect, and it was just the most amazing element in the universe. Then he said, you need to take this and deliver it to God. And then as he walked away, Jesus turns to my brother and he says, hey, you can ask that thing that you wanted to ask, but you were too scared to ask. And then my brother like sheepishly goes, did I do it? And he looked at him for a long time and he held his gaze and he said, yeah, you did. After this, and this is and I didn't include all the details. My brother, you can contact him for more details. He needs to write this down. He's never written it down. This is literally the only time it's ever been exposed anywhere. So then he rejoins the other kids, the other souls that are ascending up this mountain after he gets this beautiful material from Christ, and he's reassured by Christ. He starts leaping up the ridges again, and eventually he gets to they summit the mountain. And he says they were all waiting with this beautiful sense of anticipation and joy. And it was like when you're about to go to scout camp and you're waiting there with your bags and the bus picks you up and you're like, oh shit, summer has started. This is so, it's like it's the anticipation of, I can just sense it the way that my brother describes it. He goes, I could see perfect detail for 30 miles in north and south. He says, I could see in every direction, even down into the mountain. Through the ground, through the mountains, I could even see through the whole earth. He saw people, and then he wondered how far his senses would reach. And this is exactly the type of thing that I would do too if I had this experience. And so he looked and he could see through the entire earth, and he saw people in India walking around. And this is kind of a tangent to the story, but there's this whole thing about suffering where my brother and I both have a lot of empathy towards the suffering of other people. And we're always like trying to sense where there's suffering. It's always been kind of a thing between, him and I, and I think my other brother, Matthew, is like this. We have lots of empathy. He felt so strong and freed and powerful and, forgiven and all these things. He wondered if there was anyone who was suffering, if he could reach them. And he ended up seeing this guy in India, and he had this whole experience there, but he wanted to like reach out and help him. But there was this realization that he was kind of in his own narrative, on his own path, being taken care of by like his own guardian angels, so to speak, and his higher self and higher intelligence. And you could just say higher consciousness. Okay. So there was a whole theme there, and it was about India, and it was about learning about pain and fear and letting go. He goes, I wanted to take it from this guy. I wanted to, but I couldn't. I was told he'd be okay. It happened because I had reached out, wondering who was suffering. Okay, so there's that. Hopefully later, if he turns this into a book or he turns this into a thing, he'll go more into what he learned about suffering. At the summit, we heard what sounded like a gorgeous brass horn from forever away, eons away. He goes, we lifted off the mountains. We shot up, intuitively knowing that we needed to go towards this horn. And he goes, instantly we were going millions of miles per hour, faster than you can even think. He says galaxies that were forever away, impossible distances away, were suddenly passing him like it was nothing. He was just blipping through the universe. Together we looked like a comet, and we gradually came closer and closer together, our tails streaming hundreds of thousands of miles behind us like a comet. We landed. We saw a point of light eventually, and he describes it kind of like it's the center of the universe. He says we landed on a crystalline planet, the most gorgeous planet you could ever describe, with rivers and nature and just beautiful, beautiful nature. And he says once they got to the planet, they all split up, kind of arrived to different places. And he could sense that the rest of the people were generally being met by family groups, it was like a homecoming. So they were each going to their own homecomings. I think that's interesting. The whole planet, though, was familiar, and this was fundamentally our home. This was home. This was like where we intuitively belonged. And he says, but he had this stone, remember, and by the way, I didn't tell this part of the story. He needed to cling to this stone as tightly as possible. So through this whole thing, while he's blitzing through the universe, he's clinging to this stone. The stone is an important theme. And again, when he writes this down, he'll go more into it. My mission was to reach God and deliver this stone. So he goes, he went on this journey, and that's a whole story too, but he got to the throne of God, and he goes, I extended my hand and I opened my fingers, and there was no stone. I had become the stone. It had absorbed into my body. I was the most perfect material in the universe. I was now giving off the same brilliant light that the stone had given off. There was a moment of terror when he saw that he didn't have the stone. And by the way, that perfect material that he now was the same material of this place where he was. It was this incredible, like the whole planet was like this crystalline substance. Now, if you're, I don't ever want Mormons to feel like I'm making fun of them or talking down to them. I myself am an ex-Mormon. I'm an ex-Christian too. I'm not a religious person, but I understand religion and I understand this space. And so I can talk about this intelligently because this is my people, this is my tribe, this is the language that I grew up with. And if you're LDS, you're gonna sense a lot of LDS themes in this story, the crystalline planet and stuff. Again, sometimes when we have out of body experiences, I'm convinced that the reason we have these specific journeys and specific imagery is because it like helps us understand themes in our life. It helps us understand concepts. And so to me, there's no problem with people who are religious experiencing religious iconography. If it's conveying meaningful messages to them and it helps them understand their life and kind of understand obstacles and understand how to live in a more reasonable way, then I have no problem with the religious iconography. So that's my commentary on that. Okay, so there's a profound part, and again, this could be a whole book. There's a profound part about him becoming what was the best substance in the universe, what is essentially God. What is God, right? So then after all of this, after he had presented this stone to God and he was standing before the throne of God, it all came back. All of a sudden, he's in the dark place again. He's in the dark place and he looks up and he sees a very dim kind of light, a haze, like a morning light coming through like a hole in the top of the shed or in the top of the room. And he's starting to move up towards this very dim light. And as he gets closer to it, he realizes it's his eyeballs. It's his eyes. And he's going back in behind his eyes until now the vision is fully his vision. And his eyes are still frozen open. Now, he's only a 17-year-old, -7 degrees Fahrenheit, in shorts and a t-shirt, laying in the dirt below a windy pine tree. And he describes that there, just coming back into his body was this intense, drawn-out experience. It was like coming into a wet, wooden water, like a wet wood is how he describes it. And it took him, I think he said it took him like an hour. I have it written down here somewhere. It said it took him like an hour just to get to where he could move his head and where he could like start to move his face. And eventually they heard a chopper and he's like crawling out. He can't move his hands. So he revives, he comes back, and my cousin Kim like takes off one of her socks, and that ends up being what the helicopter sees. And it's a crazy story. They said it was, and then when they get on the helicopter, the guy goes, it was a body recovery mission. It was no longer like, we weren't trying to find you. It was, we thought you were dead. It was certain that you were dead. And this whole time, Kim, and by the way, Kim did not have this experience. Kim was Justin tried to keep Kim between him, away from the wind, between him and the rock. And it kind of mostly worked for her. And she was just like super, super cold. She figured that she would have like severe frostbite, but they didn't have, Justin got some crazy frostbite and ended up losing feeling in his nose and losing his sense of smell and like all this crazy stuff. He's had a bunch of residual stuff, but I think she was maybe a little bit heavier at the time too. So she just kind of had more meat on the bone, but it was a more, sorry, Kim, I don't mean that. Don't take that in a bad way. It was just it was a more intense experience for my brother Justin. And for Kim, she didn't experience any of that. So very interesting story. I like that he acknowledges that, a lot of it could be like imagery, or maybe more of like a vision or an understanding rather than necessarily a literal experience. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so now I want to do something that is alien stuff. Let's do alien stuff. Okay. This is such a weird podcast. I'm okay with it. I don't freaking care, dude. there's probably not a lot of podcasts like this that are going to put near-death experiences, aliens, and ghost stories together, but I'm into it. Okay, let's read through some of these. Now, I'm going to put some of these in, I'm going to start a Patreon, and I'm going to put some of them in Patreon. Item number 1. This is a friend's family member. That's what we're going to say. This is a friend's family member, and I'm going to change the names. This is a man who sent me, he gave to me a bunch of pages of his alien experiences, and I'm going to read through some of them, and some of them are really intense, and they're pretty cool. Okay. Man, there was a man and woman in my room. This is item 1, he says. When I was very small, like 5 or 6. They kept lifting my arm and touching me in the armpit/ribs and side area. He goes, they went out the window when I cried out. When I was able to cry out. The woman was very soothing with her voice. I can't remember. He told me this. He did like an interview in person. By the way, this is new to this is nowhere on the internet. So he did an interview in person, and I think he said this was telepathy the whole time. But don't quote me on that because I could be wrong. But he says her voice was very, very soothing. I don't recall what exactly she was saying, but she was calming me down, basically. The man was silent throughout and stayed in the background mostly. He may have helped hold my arm at some point. I remember he was bald, or it seemed so in the dark. The woman, as I recall, had dark, long hair. I don't recall her face, but I got the feeling it was a very pleasant face and not ugly. He goes, I remember the tingling sensation in my armpit and down my side. It seems like she was whispering something to the man as she did it too. But I can't be sure of that. Not sure if I heard any noise or sound while she did this. It seems like I was afraid to cry out, or I couldn't really cry out. When they were finished with whatever they were doing to me, I was able finally to cry out for my mom. Maybe I surprised them because I remember they went out the bedroom window so fast. It was like faster than you see normal things move. Normal people climb out of windows. It was like abnormally, weirdly fast. I cried. My mom came in the room and I told her that there was a man and a woman poking me under my armpit. The window was closed, by the way. The window was closed, maybe it may have been open and there was like a screen. I think it was closed because the point is they like flashed out the window. They like went incredibly smoothly, creepily out the window through the window, through the glass and through the screen. So the reason that, and when I got this story initially, I didn't like appreciate it for like the alien encounter that it was. One, because I really hadn't researched very much at all when it came to alien abductions and alien encounters. I still haven't researched very much. I've read, I'm on my second book. Like I'm still very unfamiliar with this, but I've heard about 10 to 20 of them with the same type of things where they would go through a pane of glass. So this is like reminiscent of other alien abductions. It's also reminiscent in the sense that there's this person there that's constantly trying to calm you down. Betty and Barney Hill talk about this. The guy from Snowflake, Arizona. Oh gosh, what's his name? How do I not know his name right now? Travis Walton, I think is his name. He talked about how they were trying to tell him, hey, like, calm down. It's okay. It's okay. That's a theme in like a lot, like half of the alien abduction and stuff that I've read through is the aliens just trying to calm you the hell down. For years after that, I couldn't sleep with my arms out of the covers. And sometimes I still feel fear about it. And I want to climb under the covers. And he's like, in his 70s now. Oh shit! Sorry, I keep giving too much information about this person. Um, and I'll send him this podcast, and if he's not comfortable with it, then maybe I'll just redo the podcast. Okay, item number 2. He's 13 years old. This is the 4th of July at Farewell Bend State Park. Uh, Parents saw something in the sky fly over as they lay on a blanket looking up. Later on, I went down to the swimming area and swam around. I got out and was walking back up the hill to my parents when I looked up and saw a metallic saucer oscillating around in the air, oscillating over the Snake River. It was very shiny, like chrome, and had some red markings on the side of it. Red markings, red almost like Japanese looking markings. Um, I have heard about that, and there's also a video of one of those weird balls that the military keeps catching, and there's red markings on the side of that one too. Just interesting. I don't know. Okay, so it was flat on the bottom, and it was round on top, and it was super shiny, super reflective, like chrome or like a mirror. It was round and round and smooth on the top and flat on the bottom. And he drew a picture. Oh, this is not going to work. He drew a picture of the thing. It was like oscillating around, but also kind of bobbing up and down as it went in a circle, like wobbling around. Just interesting. I was close to a lot of people and couldn't figure out why no one else had seen it. I started to tell people, but for some reason, a really strong feeling I got stopped me. It's kind of vague, but I guess I looked at it a little more and then ran up and told my parents about it, but it was gone when we looked for it. Item 3. When we lived down Long Lane at Second Turner House, Mom and Dad came home, and me and Grandpa heard them driving in. They didn't come in the house right away, so I looked out the kitchen door and could see the car sitting in the driveway. I shut the door, and we waited for them, and they came in after about somewheres between 15 and 30 minutes later. They said they had been watching a cigar-shaped object dart around in the sky. It would take off real fast, make sharp angled turns, and stop abruptly. It finally just shot off into the sky and disappeared. Item number 4. I don't remember my age. At Laubacher Place, I woke up in the middle of the night to find my room completely lit up from a light source coming from a bedroom window. My bedroom was on the second floor, so the light source was up real high and it was right against the window. It was steady and real bright, and I was extremely scared. I finally covered up my head with the blankets and bundled myself there for I don't know how long. I was sweating big time and pulled the blanket off my head eventually, and it was dark again. I looked around the corner to the wall after working up some courage, but nothing was there. There's more to this story. When he told me in person, there was a lot more to it, because I think he said that he felt at some point that people had come in the room and that he was paralyzed. But anyway, that's the short version, and maybe someday he'll like actually come and talk about this. Item number 5. One time, heading up hunting early in the morning before dawn, I was riding in back of a pickup and saw a single red light in the sky following us, or at least heading in the same direction as us. I saw the airplanes go by at different altitudes, had flashing lights and all these things. This one didn't flash, and when we stopped, the light turned abruptly to the right and kept going. I didn't say anything, as I just wasn't sure what it was. Interesting. Item number 6. In Seattle, my friend and I saw a definite UFO streak straight up into the night sky until it was completely out of sight. He had binoculars, and I had a telescope. It was a white cigar-shaped light, and it had a kind of light trail coming off of it as it went up. It went straight up so fast I had to pick up the telescope off the ground just to try and keep up with it. We told his wife about it, but of course, they didn't believe us as we were always kind of talking about UFOs. They said it was probably a plane. Okay. Item 7 is the real crazy one. It's where he was abducted. And it's very interesting, and it's also just has a lot of the markers, in my opinion, of an authentic abduction, and he told me about it himself. I'm going to put that one on Patreon. But basically, with this person, he seems to have been followed by the phenomenon for some reason. And for him, it's been kind of almost and this is another reason why I think it's interesting and it piques my interest. For him, it's kind of been almost a spiritual thing, a good, not a haunting thing or a scary thing. And I don't know, I have some opinions about UFOs, and I think that I just don't think they're sinister. And so there's a lot of like really cool stuff to this person's story. And so he has about 4 more pages of stuff, different items, probably about eight or 9 more items to talk about, and other UFO sightings. Okay, so that's all for this episode. Email your stories to ghostpantherpodcast@gmail.com. Please. I realize nobody's watching these videos right now. Like, no one's watching this shit, but I just have to start putting stuff out. I'm going to try and be consistent. And we all know, if you know anything about me, you know my biggest problem is consistency with anything. Consistency is like the hardest thing for me to maintain because I have the most disorganized personality in the world, but I can do it. I can be extremely consistent. So I want to do that with this podcast, and I want to start doing it, as much as I can. Hopefully I can put out 3 a week. So we will try, but email your weird shit. Please email all of your crazy, weird stories, or any story, even if they're not yours. If you know about a story, if you know about an alien abduction or a near-death experience or a ghost story that's just really weird and you want me to look at it, please email it to me, ghostpantherpodcast@gmail.com. ghostpantherpodcast@gmail.com. I already got an email, and that's probably going to be next episode. So I'm excited about that one email I got. All right, peace, guys. Bye-bye.